Bethesda has been facing a wake-up call for years now, and I really think it began in the Fallout 4-ish days, even as far back as Skyrim when you had the game, and it still doesn't run that well on the PlayStation 3, but Fallout 4 was really a turning point for myself. There was a lot to enjoy from that experience, but the clunky, dated design is one of those things that constantly gets criticized, and it has only continued. And even with Starfield, a lot of the problems that were complained about 10 years ago have only continued, and that's why discussions have been had about the future of Bethesda game studios and whether that future involves their creation engine. Now, it's important to understand here in 2025, Bethesda is still concentrating a little bit on Starfield. They have their second big expansion that's in development. Just recently, they said that, they remember that Starfield still does in fact exist. They promised new space gameplay in the back half of a random video that doesn't even mention Starfield in the title, but fortunately, a couple weeks later, we did get an official tease at the next big expansion, Terran Armada. Will it totally transform the experience? Will it make it a game of the year? Everybody loves Starfield suddenly? I highly doubt that. Shattered Space was supposed to represent that. It did not. It actually made the reputation of Starfield even worse. Hopefully with Terran Armada, it at least delivers a interesting, good experience. We'll see. I think the Starfield universe is just devoid of a lot of interest within it. There's not a lot going on that really can draw people in saying, this is the faction I love. This is the thing I want to see explored in new games. There just isn't that community that you see like with Fallout or the Elder Scrolls. But obviously, Bethesda's still doing some work with Starfield. We'll see if there's a future beyond Terran Armada, but they are working right now. Their main concentration, at least at their Maryland office, which is their main studio, is on the Elder Scrolls VI. And once the Oblivion remaster was released earlier this year, Todd Howard, who really wasn't involved or any of his team was involved in that remaster, was an outside studio, but he said, obviously we're working on the 6th chapter here. And there's been little tidbits here and there. We'll talk about that in a separate video, but the Elder Scrolls 6 is very much in development, probably just a couple of years away. And we're starting to hear a lot of conversation surrounding what the Elder Scrolls 6 should represent, and also how Bethesda Game Studios really needs to evolve as a developer. Some of that is with its writing, which in recent years has at best been competent, at worst boring and dreadful and really laughable. Fortunately, there's a ton of interesting lore and plot points like the Dwemer's fate, what's going on with the Aldmeri Dominion, the Thalmor, that I hope we do get explored in this new installment. Whether that's in a satisfying manner, that's a different question. But that is just one piece of the puzzle, because then there's the technical side, an aging, constantly updated engine that feels like it's running on fumes in 2025 and still isn't where it needs to be. We'll dive more into that technical aspect in a second, but indeed the pressure is on. The Elder Scrolls 6 is one of the most highly anticipated games of all time, probably right behind the likes of Rockstar's Grand Theft Auto 6 right now, and a former developer actually said that even if the Elder Scrolls 6 is great, he still thinks Bethesda developers are going to face a lot of horrible comments being sent their way, and even some threats and such. And I just can't really get behind this perspective because we've seen other developers in this industry face a lot of criticism. I mean, you look to what CD Projekt Red went through with Cyberpunk 2077, the launch day version, developers were being constantly attacked over that. But by the time Phantom Liberty released in that 2.0 update, the tune on the game just changed drastically. And you can even look to Rockstar Games themselves. I mean, with Red Dead Redemption 2 beforehand, there was a lot of questions if they were going to be able to deliver, especially with all the years of Grand Theft Auto Online nonsense. And even Larian, say what you will, but some people were extremely skeptical over the fact that they were going to be reviving Baldur's Gate. A lot of people nervous about a developer that had no focus on the franchise beforehand getting involved with it, and obviously they delivered big time. Now, can Bethesda do the same with the Elder Scrolls 6? I don't know, but I genuinely think that that is the type of pressure that they have to know that's going into this project. And I do think the game has to be great, especially with the massive gap between Skyrim and this new installment. And if it's anything less, you're going to hear it from fans. And obviously, I'll never get behind people going after developers and such, but this does fall on leadership. Leadership needs to understand the anticipation and the expectations that fans have for this new installment. But this is where things get really interesting, because one of the big things that has hurt Bethesda over the years is their game engine. This is something that goes as far back to the Skyrim days. I mean, hell, even to this day, it still runs horribly on PS3. The unofficial patch is still something that's very noteworthy with the impact that it had on this entire gaming industry. But the Gamebryo, which came the Creation Engine, then the Creation 2.0, still to this day feels extremely dated and clunky. One of the earliest moments I remember just thinking to myself, this has to go, was probably right around Fallout 4. That was the experience that said to me, like, I genuinely don't know why Bethesda Game Studios is continuing on this engine. But we actually heard recently from a former developer which parroted the same perspective that has been a very divided opinion for a long time now. Bethesda should abandon the Creation Engine for Unreal Engine 5, says former dev. And this is specifically coming from a former Bethesda lead artist, and he actually quit during Starfield's development because the team had grown too much. Now, Nate Perkypile has been extremely critical, I guess you could say over the last year or so, about what Bethesda Game Studios has become. Not necessarily just with the engine, but how the studio overall has it's no longer what it used to be. Now, he worked at Bethesda for 14 years, during which he was the lead artist on Fallout 76, and he worked on other titles including Fallout 3, Fallout 4, and Skyrim. Before that, he worked at Retro Studios. Now, Perkypile left Bethesda in 2021 to form his own solo studio called Just Perky Games, and Perkypile said that while he enjoyed his time at Bethesda, he left during the development of Starfield because the team size had become far too large in his opinion. And this is kind of one of those concerns that a lot of people have with modern development studios. I mean, this is one of the big things I had as a criticism with BioWare and what became of that studio, especially in the recent years. And it's no longer the BioWare that we all fell in love with, especially during the Mass Effect trilogy days. But even of the new Rising Star Studios, looking at the Sandfall Interactive, what they accomplished with Expedition 33, I was extremely hopeful after that experience that they didn't expand beyond what they were. And that's one of the things that they came out specifically saying, we're not going to expand into this giant behemoth studio. We're going to keep the core vision, this creative group that made this game, we're going to keep it to what it is. And that's, I think, a smart thing, especially in this day and age with how we've seen so many development studios being harmed by expanding way too big. Now, Perkybell goes on to say, I know a lot of people have thoughts on Starfield and how it probably is too big, should have been smaller, etc. I agree with a lot of that. And while I enjoyed working at Bethesda a lot, when we were about 65 to 110 people on Fallout 3 and Skyrim, I enjoyed it a lot less as it grew and grew. And this is something that, again, a lot of developers have talked about. It's just when you have these smaller groups of developers, it's easier to get thoughts and ideas into a game rather than when you have hundreds and thousands of developers involved in a project, because it has to go through so many different individuals to get things approved. It just creates a giant mess. And I think that's what we've seen with a lot of these big franchises and why a lot of them have fallen on hard times. But Perkypile did not stop just there. This former lead artist had a lot more to say, and yes, he gets into why Bethesda should be switching to Unreal Engine 5. Now, he says in a recent interview with Kiwi Talks, he explained why he thinks it's time for Bethesda to move over to Unreal Engine 5. I think it's pretty telling that there are some studios with similar tech that have made that leap lately, like CD Projekt Red. It's not to say that it wouldn't be a ton of work. Sure, that's completely true. It's not like you're going to be able to start making the game, but when you have this large tool base and large knowledge base people could pull from, it's easier to hire people and ramp up. I'm of the opinion that it's easier to stay relevant and not always try to play catch up, like a lot of what was done on Starfield was trying to get all of these rendering systems and animation systems up to snuff, and it makes it hard to even actually make the game. The way I describe it is to people is that you're on a train, but also laying the train tracks at the same time, but it's also on fire the entire time. And say what you will, that is something that CD Projekt Red developers described Cyberpunk 2077's development as. They had to put those train track pieces down while they're trying to develop a game, and it really hurt that studio at that time. And that is why they pulled the plug on the Red Engine and now are working on UE5 in collaboration with Epic Games. Now, Perkybile did respond to articles about it. He said, "This is me. In case it's not clear, I'm not saying it would be zero work. Obviously, it'd be a ton. I just think that's less work than the constant need to play catch up and the lost productivity due to how that engine works. I've shipped games with both." Now, Perkybile is not the only former Bethesda the developer to chime in on this conversation, because Skyrim's former lead designer actually admitted Bethesda shifting to Unreal would lose tech debt, but that is not the point. And this is a different perspective on the matter, one that I take considerable issue with. Now, speaking to video gamers, Skyrim lead designer and ex-Starfield system designer Bruce Nesmith, who left the studio just a couple of years ago, revealed that the current version of the creation engine has been perfectly tuned to make the sweeping, reactive worlds that Bethesda creates. And the problem right here is it's perfectly tuned to the type of game that Bethesda wants to make, but the type of game that Bethesda is making is just dated. It's not keeping up with what the standards are nowadays that have been set from the likes of Baldur's Gate 3, even Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. These are experiences that Bethesda should be looking at for inspiration, and also understanding that technology it does matter. You need to keep up with the times. Now, this is where Nesmith, he goes on to discuss, should they be switching to Unreal Engine? He says the game engine is not the point. The game engine is in service to the game itself. You and I could both identify 100 lousy games that used Unreal. Is it Unreal's fault? No, it's not Unreal's fault. Gamebryo is no longer a business. It hasn't been for a while. But that engine has been constantly tweaked, updated, and refined to do exactly the kind of games that Bethesda makes. The Elder Scrolls, the Fallout, Starfield, it's perfectly tuned to that kind of game. But the thing is, while it's perfectly tuned, it also has considerable issues attached with that. I mean, the Elder Scrolls, like I brought it up earlier, but the fact that it barely runs the PlayStation 3, that still is kind of a problem. And also Fallout 4, I just remember the clunky combat and also the data design in various areas, the loading screens. These are things that people have been bringing up for years, and Bethesda kind of has just been putting their fingers in their ears, just saying, la 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 la, I can't hear you. And that is a problem. And Starfield, we don't even need to get into the fact that you're playing Menu Simulator most of the time with all the various systems that are introduced. It's not fun. There is no immersion, and that's one of the big things that people want from the Elder Scrolls 6. They want that immersion. They don't want to be sitting in loading screens, even if it is just for a few seconds, especially when competitors have mostly gotten rid of all of that. Nesmith does continue on. He talks about, if Unreal, if they went, along with that, he explains changing an engine would be a huge shift for Bethesda, and one that would take numerous years to properly implement. This would result in a period of slower development, a long training process, and of course, a massive cost. Should they move to Unreal Engine? You have to do a cost-benefit analysis. The cost of moving into Unreal would be all the upfront development you'd have to make to try and shoehorn what you already used to be able to do into Unreal. It would be, I'm just going to say a number that's certainly not the real number, a year or two of technical work just to move it over to the engine as is. And then more work beyond that to tune the engine, to tune the game to work in it. That's the penalty side. That's the risk side. However, though, Nesmith does admit that there is a degree of tech debt within Bethesda's creation engine. The same as most engines, moving to Unreal could fix some of these issues, but for the most part, it doesn't really matter. The benefit is you lose a lot of tech debt. There are parts of the Gamebryo engine that I would not be surprised to find out that Bethesda can no longer compile because the original source code just doesn't compile anymore. You just got to use the compiled stuff as is, but arguing over whether or not you should use this engine or that engine, the engine is in service to the game. Is the game good? I don't care what the engine is. The game's good. Let's play the game. The thing is, though, there's an argument to be had that the game being good has not been something that a lot of people are attaching with Bethesda since 2015, maybe with Fallout 4. I mean, you can look to the Steam page as Starfield as evidence of that, a 6 out of 10. Obviously, there's other problems with that. The writing is another big thing that people have criticized for years now, but it's also just the overall feel with the experience that just isn't holding up with the times. And look, yeah, Starfield right around a 6, 5 out of 10 on Steam with hundreds of thousands of reviews. Before that was Fallout 4. I believe that's right around an 8 out of 10. It's been going lower and lower, and that should scare Bethesda leadership, but all indication is that they're not scared. And that makes me worried for what the quality will be like with the Elder Scrolls 6. Because look, there's other things, there's things about the Gamebryo Creation Engine 2.0 that I enjoy. The fact that you can pick up any item, that's cool. That's a Bethesda thing, but how does that aid the overall gameplay experience? Like, the jankiness is something that we all love about Bethesda experiences, but how does that aid the overall game? And I'd argue that it really doesn't. Like, it makes for a couple of fun videos that you can post on Twitter. Look, I have all these ham sandwiches I can throw into my Starfield ship. There's hundreds of them, thousands of them. That's cool, but how does that make the game better? It doesn't, in my opinion. And it's not like Bethesda is using these aspects to, improve quest or mission design. We haven't seen that. It's a lot of the standard stuff that we've seen since, 2011, 2010? So I do think the point that I'm trying to hit home on is, does the engine do more harm than good here in 2025? And I think there is a strong argument to say that the Gamebryo Creation Engine 2.0 just isn't good enough anymore. It must be acknowledged because there is one massive advantage to the Creation Engine 2.0, and it really has nothing to do with Bethesda, but more so the community that surrounds these games, whether that be Fallout, whether that be the Elder Scrolls, and even to a lesser degree Starfield. And it is the modding capabilities. That is not something you're going to see with Unreal Engine 5, but it is something that other engines or maybe a newer engine could compile. It's just something that, again, would take a lot of time. But we're at a point where that argument is being had, maybe it is necessary. And the counter argument has been for a very long time, well, Bethesda just needs to upgrade this aspect or this aspect of the engine. That's something that Todd Howard has even said with his technology. But we've been waiting. A lot of us have been waiting multiple games now, and that just has not happened. And a lot of the issues that have plagued the Creation Engine 2.0 continue to plague it. And it does have to be said, when is enough enough? And when we're talking about specific aspects of this engine, I found this again interesting. Nate Perkypile, he was even surprised by all of those loading screens. The fact that we're playing Menu Simulator. He was surprised by how much loading the game launched with. And this is, again, he said in an interview, it could have existed without those loading zones. Like, some of those were not there when I had been working on it, so it was a surprise to me that there was as many as there were. So why did Starfield launch with so many loading screens? Perkypile said part of the segmentation of the game has to do with the way the Creation Engine, which Bethesda uses to make its games, works, and that has a lot to do with performance. A lot of it is gating stuff off for performance in Neon. And that's just crazy because if you have played Starfield, you roam through Neon, it's not like this massive, huge experience. There's not like hundreds of NPCs mounting in this area. It really is kind of the bare minimum. And again, this just calls into question how much can, they deliver with the Elder Scrolls 6, especially if they're hamstrung by these performance issues, because it doesn't seem like Starfield addressed any of that. And it's not like I highly doubt the Elder Scrolls 6 is going to be experiencing this drastic technology leap. We haven't seen it with Starfield. I don't think we're going to see it with TES 6. And it is worth mentioning that Bruce Nesmith, the Skyrim lead designer, did address the loading screen concern, which has been plaguing Bethesda for years now. He made it sound like there's going to be loading screens in Bethesda games for years to come yet. Bucko, we just didn't have a choice, really, and I don't like that as an answer to this criticism. He says it's not that anybody at Bethesda ever wanted to do it. We just didn't have a choice, really. Everybody who complains about them assumes that it's done because we're lazy or we don't want to follow the modern thinking on stuff, but he explains that the fact of the matter is that Bethesda games are so detailed and so graphics intensive, you just can't have both present at the same time. Specifically, it's really hard to keep track of all those weird physics in the precise spot you left your cheese wheels across Bethesda's enormous open worlds if you aren't giving the game a breather every so often. And trying to make seamless loading screens, apparently, says Nesmith, caused unacceptable performance woes. I can't have the interiors of all these places loaded at the same time as the exteriors. That's just not an option. All the fancy tricks for streaming and loading and all that, you end up with hitching, so you're actually better off stopping the game briefly, doing a loading screen, than continuing on. The alternative is to make games with less going on. But then, that would be hardly a Bethesda game, would it? So it's just one of those necessary evils if the game was going to have the experience we wanted it to have. And again, I just go back to the point that I was trying to bring up earlier. Having all those cheese wheels and stuff, how does that aid the overall game? How does it make it better? Because I just don't see it outside of a couple of funny little videos and clips that are shared on like the Bethesda subreddit or various Twitter pages. I think if you polled the gaming community and you asked them, do you want those cheese wheels to still be there when you leave them to go do a mission or whatever? Or do you want a more fluid, immersive experience with less loading screens? And I think the vast majority are going to lean in that less loading screens territory. At least that's my belief based on what we've seen with all of these games over the years, not just Bethesda, but what people prioritize, because it certainly isn't graphics. It's none of that. And also, let's not act like these Bethesda experiences are pushing the bar with graphics. The facial animations still look like they're out of the year of 2011. Like, there's various things about the graphics that also don't really hold up with modern times. Now, we did get a taste of what Unreal Engine could look like in an Elder Scrolls experience earlier this year through the Oblivion remaster. Again, an outside studio worked on this, Virtuous. But it's also important to understand that all it was doing was the rendering, while Creation Engine was still doing pretty much everything else. And the rendering part was a mess. Virtuous, they've had some optimization issues in the past, and Oblivion was plagued by that. That's why some analysts have come forward saying the Elder Scrolls 6 unlikely to use Unreal Engine Engine 5 for rendering is it wouldn't solve the core creation engine issues, and that's probably true. And it would have to be, they'd have to go all in on the engine. It doesn't sound like they will. And the elephant in the room has to be mentioned, because I know people are probably already typing down the comments all about it, but yes, UE5, especially this console generation, and especially here in 2025, has been disastrous. And a lot of these developers that were working previously on proprietary software, moving then to Unreal Engine 5, it's quite clear a lot of them don't care to prioritize optimization, thus why we've seen just a plague of UE5 disasters. And do I have confidence that Bethesda wouldn't be another one a part of that list? I do not, but it's quite clear that what they have been doing isn't working. The upgrades and such, it isn't making the difference that is necessary here in the modern days of 2025. The definition of insanity is doing something over and over again and expecting a different result. I don't know if UE5 is the answer, but I can say for certain that what Bethesda has been doing over the last number of years, it quite clearly is not working. Something has to give, something has to change. This would be one of those instances that having smart leadership, especially from their above company of Microsoft, could help, but I have my doubts that'll ever happen. Now, an ex-Bethesda developer, like I said, the pressure is on the Elder Scrolls 6 right now. And even some of the former talent that have been attached, they are skeptical that this current team is going to be able to deliver. As an ex-Bethesda dev said, they're making something different than I would have done. This is somebody who worked on Oblivion, Skyrim, and such. And we've seen, like I said, there's been a lot of criticism with Todd Howard, his design philosophy, especially what it is today. We saw Skyrim's co-lead and Morrowind torchbearer saying Elder Scrolls 6 will probably be pretty normcore. I think Todd in particular gravitates not towards the weird stuff. And I think it's that playing safe aspect that really could hurt the Elder Scrolls 6, but we'll see what happens. I think Starfield really disappointed me with its lack of creativity. The universe was just not that interesting. Maybe that changes with the Terran Armada DLC expansion, their second one, but Shattered Space, that was an opportunity to really transform Starfield. I mean, look, you have this mysterious serpent society, and they just totally butchered that entire idea. And the former lead artist at Bethesda, Nate Parkipala, again, he's just had a lot of criticism for Bethesda. He again parroted more of that same perspective that Bethesda's just, they're playing it too safe. By the time Bethesda was on Starfield, you'd basically get in trouble for breaking schedule. A lot of the great stuff within Skyrim came from having the freedom to do what you want. And when you have a massive company with hundreds upon hundreds of developers all working on a project, a lot of that freedom goes away. And again, we've seen how that has harmed a number of franchises, not necessarily even just with Bethesda, just this entire industry overall. But anyway, the pressure is on the Elder Scrolls 6. The decision to go all in on the creation engine is something that Todd Howard and his team made years ago. It's just one that continues to be questioned, and now former developers are questioning it as well. Bethesda has been embarrassed. Starfield was an embarrassment, and right now there's definitely lots of calls being made into whether or not this developer can keep up with these modern times, and many are calling into question whether or not this current Bethesda can deliver the universally acclaimed open world RPGs that they used to be known for. Anyway, what are your thoughts and expectations on the Elder Scrolls 6? This video largely we talked about the technical side, a lot of the criticism concerned with that, but there's also the writing and characters and all of that. That's definitely another story to this piece, and a lot of the things that Bethesda has to get right with the Elder Scrolls 6. But let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. Thank you for watching. Make sure to leave a like if you did enjoy this video, or if you found any informative value. Consider subscribing for more videos like this, and I'll see you later.